lots to go over today. One of the things that is a ongoing theme that you'll notice here is that, I'm going to talk about UK a little bit more, and you say, oh, we just talked about that the last couple days. And I'm going to talk about the female getting her head kicked in or punched in boxing. And you say, oh, we just talked about that the other day. It's not about the individual news stories. It's about the culture underneath them. A lot of times when people want to talk about the news or culture, they say, oh, we cover culture. And then they talk about, the new Deadpool Wolverine movie and how well it did. That's not culture. Maybe that's pop culture. I don't know. But for me, I kind of look at it like when Neo first meets Cypher in The Matrix. And Neo's looking and he sees a bunch of green, cryptic characters scrolling down the screen. And he says, I just see, characters flowing down the screen. I just see type. And Cypher says, I see a blonde. I see a redhead. I think it was Cypher that told him all this. It might have been one of the other guys. Anyway, you get my point. Where he says, I see a woman. I see, a dude walking on the street. And what I try to do is every single story that we have in the news today is given to us by the government and the news as the cipher, just the little dots and digits. And you can kind of see what's going on a little bit, but there's a whole lot more on the underside. There's a whole lot more. And what I'm constantly trying to do is not just say, here's the story, but also what does it mean for us? Where does this lead us? Where are we going with this? And so I hope you understand and can be patient with me over, as I'm just getting this news channel started, because I've only been doing it now for 2-3 weeks, is that you kind of get invested with me and say, okay, let's go into the rabbit hole. Let's see what this story really means, because that's really what I'm trying to do with this particular channel. So I'm going to start. The first topic I've got is the world heading to war. U.S. says it's nowhere near ready enough. If you look at when they tried to take out Trump, and when I say they, we don't know who the they is yet. When they say they tried to take out Trump, they were saying, well, it was Iran. And then Israel just decided to drop munitions in Iran. And then they say Iran is trying to hack elections. And they say Iran. It's like, suddenly you start saying, I see a theme here. They're trying to ramp up things to get us into conflict with Iran. And then when you pull back a little bit, you say, well, you know what? Iran and China are really close right now. And Iran is sending drones off to Ukraine or to Russia right now to fight in Ukraine. You say, okay, so if we go and put stress on Iran, that puts stress on China, that puts stress on Russia, which will alleviate pressure from Ukraine, which will maybe allow Ukraine, or maybe we get involved in Ukraine. And you say, why do they care about Ukraine so much? Well, they have amazing gardening soil, but also Lindsey Graham came right straight out, looked us dead in the eye and said, they have billions, tens of billions of dollars worth of lithium and all these other mines and minerals that we don't want China and Russia to have. You say, oh, well, this is basically like the Gulf War all over again. Instead of the black oil, it's now the lithium and the nickel and the cobalt. And you say, okay, now I'm starting to get a bigger picture of this. So please understand, I'm going to try to make the thumbnails a different topic, but if I start on boxing, if I start on like what's going on in the UK, it's only to keep painting the picture that we started a few days ago because we're getting more information. And I wanted to share this. Do you guys remember Don Lemon? Or Don Lemon, that's what I called him, Don Lemon. Don Lemon was fired from CNN Network, and he started a YouTube channel. I wanted to thank you guys, because as you see, Mr. Don Lemon, who used to be on CNN, is over here on YouTube, and you'd think all his, followers would come over, and everybody would want to listen to Mr. Don Lemon. Well, you can see here he gets between 7.4 thousand, 7,400, 9,600, 10,000, 22, 18, 23. I get that many views on Rumble, and my YouTube channel's already get that many views, and I'm a nobody that's only been around for 15 hot minutes doing this. So I want to thank everybody on YouTube that's watching my content, because we're already more loved than Mr. Don Lemon from CNN. That makes me feel good. That makes me feel good. All right, and this is the other story I'm going to get into after I talk about the Iran, Russia, China thing that's going on with us. I called it yesterday. I told you guys this was going to happen. I said it. I wish I had placed money on this. I told you yesterday this was going to be a problem, and here we are 24 hours later. No one else talked about this except me. And here we are 24 hours later. It's like, ta-da, told you. The chick that fought this dude, Emain Khalif, lasted 46 seconds and 2 punches. Boom. Called it yesterday. I love when I'm ahead of the curve. On some stories, I'm behind. On other things, but how do I know this was happening? Because it's part of that matrix code that we're looking at, saying where is society going? What's going on? So this is from the Air Force Times. Not prepared. Congressional panel calls for huge defensive buildup. This is from just a couple days ago. They say Americans' odds of fighting a major war are one of the highest in 80 years, and its military isn't prepared for one. This was the finding of a bipartisan panel tasked by Congress to review U.S. Defense Secretary. U.S. Defense Strategy. Its nearly 100-page report reveals a crisis of confidence in American national security. The commission chides a Pentagon it considers too plotting, a Congress it considers too partisan, and multiple administrations it says have been too complacent to address the threats from China, Russia, and countries in the Middle East. The nation was last prepared for such a fight during the Cold War, which ended 35 years ago, the report reads. It is not prepared for today. Every 4 years, Congress gathers a group of outside experts to review the country's national defense strategy. The goal is to have an independent board assess U.S. national security like an accountant audits company books. To do so, the 8 commissioners spoke with lawmakers, U.S. allies, members of the administration, and leaders of the Pentagon, including the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense. This is all into the culture bubble. It all relates to everything else. What is the Biden administration and the Democrats been focusing on? They've been focusing on the LGHD TV community. They're focusing on making sure that men that can be women and women can be men, and paying for surgery that'll allow each to become each other, and it's free and it's on the government dime. They're having dudes come out in makeup and putting on shows to show that, hey, you're acceptable too. They come out with the ad, the Air Force, I think it was the Air Force, or maybe it was the Army. They came out with the ad where the girl comes out, it's a cartoon, and the girl comes out and she says, my 2 moms, and then says how she's, got ADD in her skin color, and then she starts talking about how she's being accepted into the military. They've dropped in recruiting standards now, so guys that wouldn't even have been accepted into the military when I was in back in the 90s, you had a weight requirement, and some guys got just in under the wire, but they were put on special meal plans with the military, and they had to do extra exercise, and they weren't allowed to eat like the rest of us were because they were on a diet right from the get-go, from walking in the door. Well, those guys now is what your average dude looks like. And the guys that were too heavy to be allowed into the military, now those are the guys that are kind of on a little bit of a weight restriction. They dropped the IQ test. The ASVAB, I think they call it, the ASVAB test. They've dropped the points on that. They've dropped that you need to be a high school graduate or have a GED, which is the equivalent. You can basically you don't have to be able to do math or be able to speak English very well. They're taking foreigners into our army. There's a whole bunch of things that you look at it and you say, hey, we got some really big problems here. We got some really big problems. They keep dropping the standards lower and lower, and they can't get enough people to go in because the corn-fed dudes, the guys from small-town USA that actually have pride in our country, we don't want to serve in this military. I did back in the day because my father was in and my grandfather was in, and I wasn't ready for college. I didn't know if I'd be ready for college. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I said, something, I'll just join the military. That'll give me a paycheck. It'll give me some experience. I can serve my country 4 years. And now, if you were to take me back and say, would you be in the military now if I, Joker, was an 18-year-old man, I would tell you to stuff it where the sun doesn't shine. Because I would not want to serve for a military and a government that it's more important about my skin color in the LGBT community than it is about serving my country, being a proud American. And according at least to the left and the administration that's in now, I am white and male, which means like I'm one of the biggest risks to national security. This is the thing that we're up against. And you say, I don't want to be a part of that. I just don't want to be a part of it. They say the report wasn't due until the end of the year, and the panel finished early so that its findings could factor into the presidential election. Both the timing and the tone are an attempt to yank public attention away from domestic issues such as the border and the economy, says Jane Harman, a former Democratic congresswoman from California and chair of the commission. Public awareness is dismal, she said, calling America's security threats blinking red. And in the meantime, we've got President Potted Plant. He came out today and made a statement about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and he said, "Oh, we're going to get the people home that are being held by Palestine." And one of the reporters said, President Trump said, or ex-President Trump said he would have been able to bring them home right away. What do you have to say to that? And President Potted Plant said, "Well, ask him why he didn't bring them home when he was president." Dude, this conflict isn't even a year old. It started October 7th of 2023. You were president. He didn't even know that. He said, "Why didn't Trump do it?" Because you've been the president for 3.5 years, you frickin' mashed potato. So when that's the guy that's leading our country, and then you've got Heels Up Harris, kind of, de facto running the country. I said this previously. You've got all these other countries that are just salivating. They're weak America. They don't have any leadership. They're in dismay. They've got so many problems right now. If we make a move, they're probably not going to be able to keep up. And when they talk about, well, we didn't send Ukraine billions of dollars. We sent them munitions, and we sent them, well, we did send them money, but we sent them munitions and other things like that. The problem that we have with you can't just ramp up production on things. It's not like the 1940s where you had the quote-unquote war machine geared up to make this stuff. If we have to crank that up, we're not ready. And you can't just say, okay, turn the machines on faster. We're getting ready to head into some trouble, and we need to have more of this stuff. That's not how any of this works. And so that's why we're in a load of trouble when we're not just picking on. We may be doing it in a proxy through Ukraine, picking on Russia, but Russia knows this. If they decide to come after us, they're going to start shutting down water processing plants and petroleum refinery stations, and we're going to be out of gas. Then you got China. They can just say, well, no more medicine for you. We have 95% of the medicine market. We're not going to sell you medicine anymore. There's a whole lot of people that have very bad illnesses that need money, and it's even simple stuff such as diabetes medicine, insulin for diabetes, things like that. And they're both in bed with Iran. So we're way behind on the 8 ball on this stuff. The commission's argument is almost as simple as supply and demand. In its eyes, America faces a much more dangerous world with competitors that are either more willing to go to war in the case of Russia or much closer to being a military peer in the case of China. But those threats have emerged or even merged. But as those threats have emerged or even merged, given that many of America's adversaries are now working more closely together, the report argues that the U.S. hasn't grown stronger in proportion. Instead, the country has proceeded largely as usual or even with more dysfunction. Examples include budgets that are too small, spending bills passed too late, legacy weapons preferred over new ones, and a public ether unaware of the challenges America faces or unmotivated to respond. How do you respond? How do you respond when you've got no one at the wheel, like no one's driving the ship? How do you respond? Even more, while the national defense strategy calls for integrated deterrence or using more than just military might to prevent conflict, the commission found that the approach isn't clearly defined or coordinated. The United States is still failing to act with the urgency required across administrations and without regard to governing party, the report says. We've gotten in such a bad place now that the Democrats and the Republicans are way more focused, both parties, They're very much focused on border talking points and J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and Kamala Harris and all the other things that have to do with elections and the LGHD TV stuff. And notice no one in our government is talking about the fact that we just crossed $35 trillion in debt. And when you go into war, the government needs that money to crank up the war machine, but we don't have any more money left. And so now, I forget what the total is today, but it's something like 2/3 of all the taxes that we collect pay for just the interest on our debt, which means in another couple of years, all our taxes will be going to debt, and we don't have any funding for anything. And nobody's talking about this. That's the thing that's freaking everybody out. Well, when I say everybody, those of us that are still paying attention. Because everybody else seems, and this is no shade on other content creators. I'm not throwing any hate at them. There are some news channels that are talking about this stuff, but there's a lot of them that aren't, and the mainstream news isn't talking about it. I can tell you now that probably the boomers and the few that are left in the other older generations and young people, the older generation is watching CNN or Fox News, whatever. The younger generation is on, I don't know, TikTok watching ASMR videos of people sitting there going on a microphone instead of saying, hey, maybe you want to wake up and pay attention to what's going on. Because I was in the military at 18, I was paying attention. And I've kind of always paid attention, not to the election stuff and like who was going to be president, but what was going on in the world. No one cares anymore. And because that's been since the citizens aren't talking about it, and so the Senate and the Congress aren't talking about it, everybody's worried about who's going to get elected. We got problems right now, and they're big ones and they're bad ones. And in the meantime, you got Kamala Harris, who's potentially the leader of the free world, going to like these events, these rallies, and she's out there with Megan Thee Stallion on a stage. Like that is not where we need to be as a country right now. And all the crap that's coming across TikTok and the internet getting fed into young people, now they're turning into, I don't know, ADD idiots. They're not paying attention to anything. They say the commissioners were equally nominated by Republicans and Democrats in Congress and all agreed to the report's conclusions. Their arguments resemble those made by many defense hawks around Washington, such as Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, who says that the country needs to spend far more on defense. Many of them, including the commissioners authoring this report, use the Cold War as an analog. During the defense buildup led by President Ronald Reagan in the U.S. spent 6.8% of GDP on defense. Now it spends around 3%, although in real terms, defense spending reached its all-time high during the wars earlier this century, according to the data from the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. The last commission's report assessing the 2018 National Defense Strategy recommended increasing the defense budget by 3 to 5% each year. The mark of the U.S. has not hit a mark the U.S. has not hit through. It's unclear what analysis supports that number. One of the most recent barriers was a deal struck last year to avoid a government default, which capped increases to the Pentagon budget at 1%, a cut when accounting for inflation. The challenge is this. Right now, I think discretionary spending is only somewhere around 10% of the total budget. So you've got military, you've got Social Security, you've got Medicare, you've got all these giveaways, and because so many more people today are allowed to collect those giveaways, and I'm not talking about the retired people, like they earned it, they paid into the system, they should get their dues. But when you have so many people that are collecting unemployment and you've got them on Medicare and Medicaid and all these other plans, that takes up something 80 some odd % of our budget, which leaves no discretionary left over. And then on top of that, we're sending off all this money and these supplies to Ukraine and to Israel and these other. I mean, we just spent, what was it, $130 million for a temporary barge off the coast of of Palestine, and the thing sank in the ocean within a week. They spent. I talked about this yesterday. They spent $8 billion or some crazy number for installing car chargers across the United States, and they've only built 8 of them. This spending can't continue like this. And now, within the next couple of years, we will be putting 100%. There will be no discretionary spending. We'll be putting 100% into the interest, 100%. And then we're done. Then it's like, okay, we've got to borrow to pay ourselves. That's you're borrowing from one credit card to put on another credit card at that point. And then to pay this credit card, you're borrowing from the other one to put it over. It's magic money. This is unsustainable, and that's why we're in a lot of trouble. And if they just ramp it up and do the money printer so they can afford to, to get into ramping up our defense, well, that's inflation, and then we're broke. It's all tied together. So when you see a story about the cost of groceries, that's tied to inflation, and inflation is tied to our budget, and our budget's tied to our spending, and our spending's tied to this, and all the free government giveaways, and the electric car mandates, and the Green New Deal. It all has something to do. They're all tied in together, and that's why each one of these stories independently is important, because it's like a spider web, and if you pull off a couple of strands on the opposite corners of a spider web, what happens? Everything collapses. And that's what we're getting ourselves into, and that's why all this stuff is important. The potential collapse is as great as the Great Depression, but it won't happen suddenly like that. It'll happen in the 5 and 10% at a time. Groceries keep going up 2% month after month after month. You say, well, that's not too bad, until you look at a year later, it's 25% higher. And the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after, and then you start getting into this Venezuela type stuff, which is why the Venezuela story is important, because it shows you things got so bad there so quickly that the entire country collapsed from being one of the most richest, strongest oil exporters. They were pumping out more oil than anybody else in the world. And they went, and instead of turning into Dubai, they turned into Haiti. Not quite, but close. That's why all this stuff is so important. They say since the war in Ukraine, the U.S. has passed multiple enormous supplemental security bills, most recently a $95 billion one this April that included funding to support Kyiv, Israel, and countries in the Indo-Pacific. These bills don't technically factor into the annual defense budget like a garnish not listed on a recipe, but they've poured money into American defense industry. Well, that's fine, except we're not using that for our own defense. They say a solution. But legislation and money do little to solve what the commission calls America's biggest issues, the home front. The military isn't recruiting as many people as it wants, though it's doing better retaining those who already joined. And during that's a very, very nice way of saying, well, we're not growing as quick as we want, but we're also not shrinking as fast as we might. That's not a great. They say, and during the Cold War, the report argues higher tax rates for businesses and high earners made it easier to sustain a bigger defense budget. The combination of a less mobilized public, lower taxes, much higher government debt make a defense buildup harder, the report argues. We're not just saying, oh my God, the house is burning, figure it out, says Harmon. We have ideas. And he says those recommendations fall into a few main categories. Their quote is, we're not saying, oh my God, the house is burning. We have ideas. Okay, you have ideas, but how are you going to implement them? The only thing they can do at this point is to fire up the money printer. We're out of money. They say the first is to reassess the Pentagon's acquisition and innovation systems. Leader in the Defense Department should review its orders and have more freedom to cancel less relevant purchases. Hey, did you know the Pentagon's failed the last 6 audits? And they're like, oh, we're missing like $1 trillion. Oops. How about we do something about that? It's been a joke. It's been a joke since I was in the military about the $1,500 toilets and the $3,000 hammers. How about we get some accounting in to figure out where our money is going? They say the Defense Department should also change its buying practices, a point argued by a separate congressional commission earlier this year. to fulfill purchases faster, work more with non-traditional defense companies, which are increasingly building more innovative items, I guess you could say, if I have to take that word out later. It's kind of funny because when I'm doing videos for YouTube, I'm like, oh, I wish I'd used a different word there. So it's almost like when I'm reading the sentence, I want to use 3 different words so I can clip out whichever one YouTube doesn't like. That's how annoying YouTube is. They say a second point concerns spending. Congress should immediately pass a supplemental defense bill so the U.S. can build more equipment, harden military sites that are being breathed upon by China, and buy more munitions. Perhaps more abruptly, Congress should also ditch the budget caps holding back defense spending this year. There you go. Now, I haven't read all the way down through this article. I do not have enough time to read every single article all the way through. But that re-solidifies what I just said 3 minutes ago. Let's get rid of the caps on these bills so we can spend more. You don't have any more money, which means they just got to crank up the money printers. It's fucking so stupid. The rest of us cannot afford anything because the government cannot figure out what it's doing. So inflation's going to keep cranking and cranking and cranking. And what they'll do is they'll wait till right before the election, probably in September, October, November, sometime around there. And then they'll say, hey, everybody, we're doing rate cuts. And almost every time, as a matter of fact, out of the last 7 rate cuts, 7 times right after that came a recession. So they'll put us right into recession right about the election. They say the upshot would be a force capable of more than protecting the homeland, fighting one major war and preventing another, which is the last 2 defense strategies have proposed. Given the threat of Russia, China, and Iran in the Middle East, America's military should be able to fight across multiple theaters at once. So you want to be able to take on China that is almost at parity with the United States. And China can't do much either. Let's be honest, China's economic situation is as bad as, if not worse than the United States. Russia is actually doing pretty well because they've been selling to other theaters other than the sanctioned countries. Like, for example, they used to sell liquid natural gas to Germany, and they say, we're gonna make it so you can't. We got sanctions on you. So Russia says, okay, we'll sell it to India, because India is not on the sanction list. Then India buys it, and then India says, do you need some liquid natural gas? We'll sell it to you. And they become a middleman, and India takes a cut of it. So it's costing Germany more money to still get the LNG from Russia, and Russia's still making their money. They're also funneling it through, wait for it, China. So there's no surprises there. This is why the sanctions haven't worked, and Russia seems to be doing relatively well, at least when it comes to finances. Now, maybe they can't crank up their munitions for the war machine either, because I've heard they've been struggling on that front as well. But you know what it reminds me a little bit? It's like 3 mangled, kind of feral dogs that are all underweight and starving, and they're all getting ready to fight each other. And you're like, this is not going to be pretty. Or maybe they're not even dogs. It's like 3 old grandmothers fighting over a banana or a cookie. And you're like, this is just sad. This is going to be sad and not productive in any way, shape, or form. They say, nevertheless, it doesn't recommend specific spending or force structure targets, instead saying they should be bigger, but not by how much. We weren't going to dictate a solution, but it does need to be a multi-theater force planning construct, says Tom Monken, head of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments and one of the commissioners. Some of the panelists have served on past review boards, making similar recommendations and seen them ignored. On one page in the report, the list key paragraphs from earlier reports issued in 2018, 2014, and 2010, each escalating an alarm. Here's why that's important. Because since the 2008 collapse of everything financially, they came out in 2010 and they said, we have a problem. 2014, we still have this problem. 2018, hello, problem. And they're not doing anything about it because they have no money. And what the necessary thing would have to be is a president or an administrator or the senators or the Congress, whoever's running, they would need to step up on the podium and they'd have to say, everybody, we have to raise the retirement age on Social Security by 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is. Everybody, we need to make cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. And because the minute somebody says that, they're going to lose all the boomer votes, and which is, I don't know, 10%, 15, 20%. That's enough to lose an election. That's really what it would take for somebody to do, is come forward and say, we're out of money, everybody. And we can't keep printing, or else the groceries that you buy that are, 20% overinflated now are going to be 200% inflated later on. So you're either going to lose your Medicaid or Medicare, or you'll need it because you can't afford groceries. But no one's taking the responsibility of actually saying this. Monken, who worked on the last commission, listed shortfalls they identified that later provide prescience. Munitions, raising defense spending, the ability for America's military to fight jointly or with multiple services working together. They have since become top priorities for the Pentagon and many members of Congress. We find that the solution has deteriorated since the 2018 Commission's report, and that many of the previous recommendations were not adopted, the report says. Okay, so this is where you say, well, what does this mean? It means we're boned, kind of. If you think, okay, well, what if we ramp things up? Okay, it's going to take a couple years. We don't have a couple years. Yeah, no kidding. That's the problem. We could ramp it up faster, but it would need a lot more money. I'm not going to read all the way down through these. It's the headlines, and because we're painting a picture here. So we just read a report that says the military's not ready, that we don't have the money. They're more worried about elections. We're not ready for defense. We're not ready for any of this stuff. So that's the report that was just given. So where are we in the world right now? Where are we sitting? What's going on? Well, this is from today, from Newsmax. Mohammed Deif, the military leader who eluded Israel for decades, is claimed to be ended, which means they dropped they dropped something on him and they got him. I don't know what it was exactly. But supposedly he's the leader of the group that is leading Palestinians. And Israeli took him out, supposedly. And they took him out in Iran when he was at a meeting. So that basically means Israel just dropped on Iran. And then we look at this from Real Clear Politics. Rep. Waltz, the guy that tried to take out Trump, he had overseas accounts, and it's an Iranian plot. Do you see where we're going here? So Israel drops munitions on Iran. The guy that took up at Trump from supposedly Iran. It's amazing. They can find he has these secret accounts with Iran and stuff like that, but they can't find his social media. Pompeo, a week ago, from Reason, Pompeo's selling a new Iran war to Republicans. He's got they say an obsession with Iran, and so now he's pushing for Iran. From France, Macron warns Iran is against continuing to support the Russian war against Ukraine. So now Macron's saying, hey, do you know who's a problem? This Iran country. So it's not just the U.S. doing this. The West, from Sky News, which is Australia, the West is facing the possibility of war as Iran gets close to having the nuke. And now they're warning about that. So now Iran again. Hey, you know what's funny? Do you know who United States gives money to? Iran. How do you like that? From Reuters, Russia calls for Middle East to step back from the brink of war because now, and here it is right here. Russia is now involved, and they condemned ending the leader of the group in charge of Palestine. He said, hey, Russia says, hey, you got to leave that alone. Go away. And Israel saying, nope. And so what'll happen is Israel and Iran will probably amp up the conflict. So now you've got Russia backing Iran because Iran's sending drones and stuff to Russia. And let me pause it on here. Right from this blurb they put up, Russia may be providing Iran with advanced military equipment and components, including helicopters and air defense systems. Iran is giving drones to Russia. Relationship transforming into a full-fledged defense partnership. So now if you have Iran and they're chipping at Israel, and Russia is, you could say, well, that puts Russia on two fronts. Yes, it does. That puts Russia on Ukraine, but Israel's also sending the drones against Ukraine. Russia's sending armament to Iran so that they can, have the conflict with Israel. And now you've got two countries that are co-jointly attacking two other countries. And who's backing up those two other countries? The United States and Europe. And so now you've got Europe and the United States kind of on with a front of two countries, and you've got Iran and Russia fighting those two countries. And in the meantime, guess who's sniffing around? Guess who's keeping an eye on everything? Guess who's going to back up Russia if something pops off? China. So then it'll be China and Russia and Iran versus Ukraine and Israel and the United States and Europe. That's kind of, and I don't know about you, but that sure sounds like a world war. So, and the commission says, we're not ready for any of this. We're not ready for any of this stuff. Remember, a few weeks ago, Russia had a submarine, I think, and two other ships that were off the coast or the port of Cuba. I don't know if they left and came back, but you know what's still down off the port of Cuba? That's right, Russian ships. They haven't gone anywhere, or they left and came back or swapped out. They're still down there, which means that they're sniffing around on us. Who knows what technology they have? And what are the congressmen and the senators, most of them, what are they doing right now? They're investigating the guy that took threw some lead at Trump. They're investigating that, and they're worried about their elections and getting reelected. They're not being serious about all this stuff. We've got so many problems, and no one's paying attention to it. The last one, Russia-Ukraine war, China's vanishing neutrality. Full Chinese logistical support for Russia could be the real game changer of the war, and that support is growing more important and less discreet. China is literally coming out now saying, we're going to full-blown support Russia. We're full-blown supporting Russia. That's all there is to it. Okay, well, if it's going to be China and Russia and Iran, and what'll happen if Iran gets into it? Probably Iraq, probably a couple of other these Middle Eastern countries will start supplying and helping out, and it'll be Iran and Iraq again, both together. I'm not sure what other countries are around that area. I could look, but you're probably going to see the Middle East versus Israel, Ukraine and Russia. We're just, what do you do at that point? What do you do at that point? Because we don't have anybody in the White House. We don't have the money to arm up and to ramp anything up. We're boned. That's what it is. We're boned. And that's why when I hear Kamala Harris coming out here and she's got Megan the Stallion and she's like, oh, well, you need to vote for me because of my skin color and the fact that I'll be the first woman and the fact, how about somebody figure out our budget? How about somebody figure out what we're going to do about the impending doom of conflict that is coming down on top of us? And in the meantime, Heels Up Harris is just cackling us, right towards the... What do you do?